Hey, welcome to DC Signal to Noise. We're back, Jim Wiesmeyer.
We absolutely are. And I really can't complain we haven't been on because you're coming out of COVID.
Yeah, knock on wood. It hit our whole household, but not as bad as it has some other people. But it's significant. It took us out for several days. So, but again, not nearly as bad as some of other folks have it. So I feel very fortunate.
Yes.
And we're all on the mend here. So that's very good.
That is.
Appreciate folks joining us today, already stacking up. So as always, be sure to throw comments in the comment section there. Throw us your questions. We'd be more than happy to take those on. And a lot of things happened in the last couple of weeks that we need to take on, Jim Wiesmeyer.
Yes, and we've got more than a few updates since AgriTalk program this morning on a number of topics.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that then. So, again, anything you want to throw at us, throw it in the comments there. Get them in early so we know we can work them into the conversation here and get them early on in the conversation so we know what you want to hear about. Some of the things on our list, obviously, we're going to talk about the omnibus spending bill and whether or not we're going to have a government shutdown tonight. Tied in with that is the prospect for COVID aid. What's in that COVID aid package for agriculture, or what we know of anyway at this point. We're going to spend some time talking about Biden and climate, and he has set forward a pretty aggressive climate cabinet that you talked about this morning on AgriTalk, Jim, and we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. We also saw in the last couple of weeks the House Ag Committee leadership take shape, and we'll get into what we know about the new leaders there. Talk about Biden and trade priorities. We talked a little bit about that on AgriTalk this morning. I want to get a little bit deeper into that. And also, you got some updates on the Georgia races.
Absolutely.
That we'll get into. All right. Anything else to add to the list?
No. Well, we've got the omnibus spending bill because there's always surprises in that. So we'll merge that in with the COVID aid package.
Great. All right. And again, anything not on that list that you want us to talk about, or any specific questions about any of those items, drop us a comment there in the comment section there on Facebook. All right. And actually, Eric Crawley, our producer, who we need to recognize, does a great job of putting this together for us. And I know you turned off the echo cancellation this time, but I'm getting an echo in my earpiece. So maybe turn it back on if you can. Check, test 1, 2. Yeah, it's still there. And let's see what he's saying about that before we get started.
I don't hear anything.
Yeah, I'm hearing something, but I'll deal with it. All right, well, let's get going then.
Sure.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. It's Friday. After a couple weeks off, we're back on DC Signal to Noise. I'm John Harris, along with Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer. And, well, Jim, first, I guess we owe an explanation here, and it's my fault we've been gone a couple of weeks. To be blunt, coronavirus hit our house, and we were down and out for a little over a week. But I consider ourselves very fortunate, even though we all got it. It's much milder than some other people have had it, even though it was fairly significant. But we're all pretty well recovered now. So I feel pretty thankful, and certainly missed doing this for a couple of weeks. Glad to be back this week.
It's good to have you back, and your voice is strong. That's what I listen for. Your voice is back.
Indeed. So let's get started with it. And again, first of all, if you're listening on the podcast, a reminder that we do this live on the AgriTalk Facebook page at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern every Friday. Although we offer Friday now because of holidays, but join us on the AgriTalk Facebook page and join in the conversation. We can ask questions live, like Ryan already has. We'll get to his question about grain export numbers here in a little bit later on in the conversation. But be sure to do that. And if you are joining right now as we record this live, be sure to add your question or comment in the comment section there. Let's get to it, Jim. And let's start with, again, we're recording this on Friday afternoon. We're going to see the government shut down later today.
It could, but it would be, let's hopefully, even if it does shut down, OMB is signaling that their current expectations, Office Management and Budget, is that it wouldn't be long. So they're not putting out any advisories other than that. We're seeing the typical, I mostly call them games, but the senators, mentioning some, things are heartfelt. Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri is saying he won't give the okay for any unanimous consent because he wants to know the specific language in the around $900 billion, COVID aid package. And there are some other things. A number of Senate Democrats are saying, wait a minute, Republicans want to stop some of these lending programs from the Federal Reserve. So they're putting out some signals there. I think that's politics on both sides, John. That's the signal that I'm getting, and it's mostly noise.
Yeah, and again, just for the background, we have to have either an omnibus spending bill or a continuing resolution by midnight tonight, or technically the government is operating without a budget. As you noted, OMB has said they're not all that concerned because they think there is a budget agreement close. If that is the case, they are not going to order any shutdowns of government agencies. If it appears that an agreement is close, and we'll have something Monday or Tuesday. Now, again, well, first of all, Jim, your perspective, do you think, it doesn't look likely we'll have an omnibus bill passed today. So do they punt with the CR, or do they roll the dice and not pass anything tonight?
Well, it could be a combination of those things. I think the vehicle that they want to put the COVID aid package on is the omnibus spending bill for fiscal year 2021, which, by the way, began October 1. So we've been in continuing stopgap spending measures for all this time. Again, would I be shocked if this COVID aid package falls apart? Not what we've been through with this Congress and this year, but expectations are that there could be some political implications if they don't come up with the COVID aid package down in Georgia on those two critical Senate January 5th runoffs. We'll have more on that later. So, and the omnibus spending bill is the big kahuna here. You think a $900 billion package would be the biggest thing, but we're talking about a $1.4 trillion spending measure. And I will tell you, on omnibus spending measures, you always get some surprises, mostly positive, but how both political parties get in some of language that has not been rumored. And this could include some agriculture programs, and it could include WIP plus language, John.
Well, let's dig into that. Well, first of all, update on WIP Plus. You reported today that funding, that those checks are starting to flow again after some pushing that you've done on behalf of farmers.
And I had an email from a Signal to Noise listener or viewer who emailed me early this morning, and he said he received notice this morning that 50% of his WIP Plus payment should arrive before the end of 2020, and that's what I confirmed. These producers will be getting them next week, I was told. So, payments have resumed, but we don't know whether any additional portion of the remaining 50% is going to be honored. But I was told to stay tuned relative to this omnibus bill. So that's the signal I got, John, that I think we could, get some news. Now, the holdup has been the Office Management and Budget was in what they call a reapportionment with USDA in order to complete the payments. I have no idea what that means and still don't. But at least that was provided by OMB, so now we see a resumption of this. But number one, we've got some good news on at least that 50% payment for a multitude of years, and then two, to me, we're going to get some other good news on that other 50% payout.
What else could we be looking for in this omnibus spending bill for ag?
Well, we better get some details on the projected $13 billion in agriculture, funding into that bill. Then we've got at least $13 billion in, food and nutrition, primarily food stamps, John. And I know that's a matter of contention. And $10 billion for broadband, funding, that they continue to fund that. And that's a critical need in the rural countryside. What I'm hearing is that we may have some specific language relative to improving CFAP 2 in which some contract poultry producers and perhaps others, will get some payments. I don't know whether that includes the ethanol industry or not. These are some of the language elements that we will all look at once we get the official language when they release it. When you hear that official language has been released, that's the signal that this thing is going to go onto the House and Senate floor and it's going to be approved. That's the signal that I'm waiting for.
All right, and that's the omnibus spending bill side. We also have now the coronavirus aid package side. What do we know about ag provisions in that at this point, at least in the $908 billion package that's been put together by the bipartisan group?
Well, that's what I went through for the aid bill. That's the 13 billion.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, 13, and 10, and some perhaps specific language relative to contract poultry payments. Let's hope some additional, flexibility, for the hog industry as well. And the ethanol lobbyists have campaigned for more than a few months for their aid. That remains to be seen on that. On the omnibus side, John, I think that'll be more into the whip plus area, and perhaps some other surprises. The word broke this morning that the Democrats were trying to get in language that would waive Biden's defense secretary nominee because he's part of the military now. These are the things you see in the last train going out of a Congress that will be no more after they adjourn.
And some tax provisions that would benefit those that took out PPP loans as well being bandied around?
Absolutely. I think there's a litany of things in either bill. I don't know whether they're going to put them, but in a must-pass bill of this magnitude, you have more than a few senators and representatives wanting to get in their last of the Congress initiatives. So that's why we're waiting on official language.
All right. Let's pull out the crystal ball. I think it's pretty obvious we're not going to see an omnibus spending bill tonight. Do they pass the CR, or do they wait till Monday?
Well, you probably need a unanimous consent. They did last Friday, but again, I would think that they would. But common sense in this Congress are not equal terms. So. What I told Brian Grady, a pro farmer, go watch your football games this weekend. Don't worry about Congress and all their ups and downs, and wait until maybe Sunday or over the weekend to see whether or not they have a game plan unfolding. You would hope that there would be a short-term stopgap spending measure, because any lawmaker should not want to see the government shut down, no matter whether or not there would be major implications or not, which there wouldn't for a short term. But, the American public already is very negative when it comes to Congress, and this would just increase that animosity, John.
Well, particularly if it impacts vaccine distribution, that would, I think, get a pretty good uproar from the public.
And there should be, because, these states need funding and perhaps language directing some additional provisions relative to the vaccine distribution. Absolutely, this is not a child's game they're playing in Congress.
And so, of course, if we don't get an omnibus spending bill today, that means we're not going to get a coronavirus aid package today either, which I guess means everybody's going to be trying to go home on Wednesday. Is that when we actually see something happen on both these issues?
I think you could either Tuesday or Wednesday. The biggest thing, the biggest positive this week is when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell went public in front of the cameras and said they're not going to go home until there's a COVID aid package. I think he even said approved, because that would be major as well. And that was when the markets reacted. We made new highs in all across the board, intraday or actual highs when it came to the Dow. You're down today because of the uncertainty, as we've already talked about. But I'm going to take my cue from Mitch McConnell. He would not have gone public with that if his usually on the mark prognostications on the end of a session is not realized. So I'm pretty upbeat that we'll eventually have something.
All right. Let's. I want to get into climate issues here in just a moment, but first, let's turn to Ryan's question. I appreciate Ryan, Danny, and Jay. I'll check it in on here, and again, throw a question in the comments if there's something you'd like us to talk about. But Ryan's asking about grain export numbers for 2021. I guess the first conversation you've got to have on that is China phase one. All indications are at this point that they're moving forward, but I guess we don't know how yet they're going to react to new administration, Jim.
Yes, well, Biden's people, now his U.S. trade rep nominee is Catherine, I forgot, Tai.
Yeah.
And she speaks Mandarin Chinese fluently. Her parents came from Taiwan. They got to Taiwan from China, and she is well known when it comes to U.S.-China trade relations, because one of her portfolios when she worked at the U.S. Trade Rep's office was making sure China lived up to its World Trade Organization commitment. So I think she's going to be serious in the implementation of not only their WTO commitments, which they've been rather lenient on, and also relative to the phase one. I hear pretty good positives out of the Biden people, is that they're not going to take on the phase one agreement, but they do want China to fulfill those commitments. Now, if that's the case, they're short somewhat on the first calendar year, commitments for 2020, and they already have higher dollar amounts, commitments for 2021. So that's going to be a significant factor as 2021 unfolds, John. But overall, for the question, not only China needs the grains. They're building up, I think, their hog industry, at least from China numbers, if you can believe them, and a lot of people don't, to tell you the truth. They're at 90, but they're back at 90% of where they want to be in their hog industry. Well, that means they're going to need corn, other feed grains, soybean meal, etc. So they'll need soybeans to crush into meal. And so they outright need, these commodities. Overall, outside this country, we've got carryover for both corn and soybeans, going down to, in the case of soybeans, you're down to the rust once USDA gets realistic on some of their demand estimates. I noted this morning that USDA's, we're already at for export sales for U.S. soybean exports at 90% of USDA's projection for the 2021 year. So most of the traders and analysts in the industry thinks the World Board is going to have to boost their estimate from 25 to 70, million bushels. When you're at squeezy tight carryover now for soybeans. This is why the market continues to be bought on the down days, because importers are looking at the situation. They're looking at to the mixed weather patterns in South America, more than a little concern there in Brazil and some of the dry areas, even though they've recently, had some precip, but not all across their, key growing regions. And also more than a few domestic buyers of corn and soybeans are short bought. So they've been buying the dips. So that's why you've seen the pretty good run up this week in soybean meal, which once again, I remember the first thing I learned when I started at Pro Farmer from Merrill Oster as a big hog producer, Merrill was, you make sure you've got your meal meat needs covered by Thanksgiving. And that's still very solid advice of those. If those users of meal would have done that this year, they'd be ahead right now, John. Bottom line on exports is it looks like the U.S. is going to have a pretty good to very good year in 2021 relative to the exports, not only volume, but value, because we've got soybeans again over well over now $12, and corn will, in my judgment, continue to go higher because we're going to have that battle for acreage in 2021. So that's going to rise, corn up, and also their carryover has been going down, John. So a pretty upbeat picture from the numbers we know right now.
Yeah, one twist, potential twist on the China numbers. Their purchases have been driven in part by their commitments under Phase One, but also they've seen price opportunity earlier on in this year that isn't there anymore, and so it'll be interesting to see if that impacts their purchasing behavior at all.
Yes, well, they're already, I quoted one trader who's been uncannily accurate on China over the last year. He's already saying China has purchased anywhere from 700,000 tons to 1 million tons of Brazilian safrinha crop, corn. Mm. So they're already looking out further because they're nervous relative to the carryover situation in the U.S. and also South American production potential. So I think China is signaling that we're going to have firm cash and futures prices for both corn and soybeans, and we need that to continue because, as we've always said, farmers and ranchers want to get their cash income from the marketplace as opposed to ad hoc CFAP payments, etc.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's talk about that for a little bit because there is likely to be a dramatic change in 2021. We had some 30% plus of farm income coming from ad hoc payments in 2020. We're not likely to have a significant source of ad hoc payments in 2021. As you mentioned, I think most farmers would welcome that, but will the marketplace be able to replace that amount of cash that went into ag country from CFAP 2?
You'd have to have a combination of a pretty big crop situation and also higher prices from even what we see today. You can't rule that out, but it's hard to replace 36.7%, that's USDA's estimate of net farm income being taxpayer payments, John. So, but that by no means we're going to see a major downturn in net farm income, but to get to this year's calendar year level farm income, it could be a hurdle because we're looking at, as you said, all those multiple billions of dollars in both trade mitigation payments and CFAP 1 and 2. But if you're talking even the possibility, and I think that it is fair to say the possibility of $13 beans and $4.50 $4.75 corn, that'll go a long ways to making up some of that difference from a government taxpayer payment area, John.
Yeah, indeed, and it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out in 2021. All right, let's turn to climate change. You said this morning on AgriTalk that this is a very aggressive climate team that Joe Biden is putting forward. EPA, the climate czar, John Kerry as the ultimate climate czar, if you will. The appointment of the Department of Interior. In your perspective, how is this all playing out, and what signal is this sending to the marketplace?
Well, the signal to the marketplace is aggressive because you look up and down his cabinet list, and more than a few, the majority of them have experience in this climate change area. Now, Biden can do a lot relative to regulations and executive orders, just much like we've seen under the Obama and the Trump administrations, but he really needs Congress, control of the Senate, because they'll have control of the House, although the slimmest majority since 1945, John. But I want to go back to some of these nominees. Senator Kramer, Republican from North Dakota, just a few minutes ago came out and said he's going to focus, and there could be a brawl, was his word, when they look at Biden's nominee for the Interior Department.
Really?
Who was Deborah Haaland. She was one of the first supporters of the Green New Deal. So I think they're laying down some markers here, John. And of course, along with John Kerry, who negotiated and pushed through the Paris Club agreement, he's going to take the international flavor, and he's really a known commodity. He's aggressive when it comes to climate change, and to be frank, he let China and India off the hook for 10 years of not having to come up with near the constraints that the U.S. would be in. So hopefully that'll change in some of the updated revisions if the U.S. is going to rejoin it. And Biden said we'll rejoin it the first week he's in office after January 20th inauguration. But the other key person is former EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy. Yeah, and she's a pistol. She's a straight-talking Massachusetts native, and she's going to be the domestic side of the, quote, energy czar people. And she once told EPA employees to, quote, and this is a quote, keep your asses in your seats and wait out the Trump administration. So she's pretty aggressive. She likes the stick approach. She likes the regulatory approach. And as we talked on AgriTalk, this is what concerns the agribusiness and the overall business community, that there has to be a good combination of carrot and stick for a true climate change process in this great country to succeed. And I know she will not make the final decisions, and that's where Biden, I think, will be hopefully will be a pragmatist once it comes to being realistic of what he can do, because it could really come back to haunt the Democrat Party in the first midterm elections under the Biden administration in 2022, John.
Yeah, and as we talked again this morning, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but there has been a little bit of optimism in ag country about where some of the climate issues are headed, and seeing some opportunities for profit. And I think the appointment of Gina McCarthy in there maybe puts some question marks on how much carrot and how much stick there will be there ultimately, and maybe tamper some of that optimism because of the experience that agriculture had with her when she was EPA administrator in the second Obama administration.
Yes, including the waters of the U.S. rule, where she took on Farm Bureau and others. Remember the ditch? She said to ditch. That concept, getting, directly digging, if you will, the Farm Bureau, excellent lobbying position on the WOTUS bill. But we also had the nominee for the EPA come out, Michael Regan. Yeah. He's been giving usually favorable reviews. The one we were looking at were two, from the pork producers and the corn producers. The national pork producers came out and said, hey, we've worked with him in the past. They congratulated Regan on his nomination. North Carolina, they noted, is a major, pork producing states, and quote, from MPPC, he's always had an open door, valued diverse points of view, and worked to find solutions that were based on science and data that were his guiding decisions. So that's a pretty good initial statement. Now, the corn growers were more cautious. They said that they're going to look forward to working with Regan on issues of importance to corn farmers, and that's number one, is the renewable fuel standard program, and they want an open dialogue. So those are the two major ones. But in my research on Regan,
then he had NCBA saying that they recognize that he's been nominated.
Yeah.
which was pretty much the sum of their statement, which was kind of odd, but
yeah. Well, they've learned to be cautious, I guess. That's history showing out there. But he brings his state. He's got a pretty good pedigree. He used to work in two administrations in Washington under EPA, so he knows where the doors are, John. But there's a lot of landmines when it comes to EPA that he's going to have to be very careful in order to build the consensus. And of course, he'll be led. He didn't have the two energy czars, if you will, that the last few EPA administrators have had relative to Biden's really focus on climate change. And because we're going to see USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, the designate, come in, and he's going to play a principal role along with the Energy Secretary, Treasury Department, all that. That shows you talk about a multitude of focus by the incoming Biden people on climate change. But bottom line for farmers and ranchers that I get emails from and talk with over the phones, they want to see the details of how it will impact the ag business sector, and I think they're right on there. They want to see whether or not this program could be inclusive relative to practices, best practices that they've already done, the so-called legacy implementation, even if it's a one-year payment. And also they want to make sure that trading companies relative to this potential program are not seeing the most of the rewards as opposed to actual producers who have to fulfill those commitments, John.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to go back and highlight that NPPC statement about Michael Regan being nominated as EPA administrator, because that is very significant. Because number one, North Carolina is the largest hog producing state, but also number two, that's where those nuisance lawsuits against Smithfield took place. And for NPPC to come out of that, what transpired there, and those lawsuits, and say that they had positive communication with Michael Regan, I think that's a significant statement going into his nomination.
I think it is. And Regan has also been involved in implementing those new monitoring requirements for hog operations in the state. And that another goes, with the NPPC, statement that they've worked with him in the past. So he doesn't appears to be at this juncture pragmatic, but in that statement from the pork producers, they did say, we hope those same qualities will be carried over to his leadership at EPA. Because we've seen chameleons before come in and at the state level and then be far more aggressive at the federal level. So, but at least he does get pretty high rankings from people who know him and have worked with him, John.
Well, let's face it, as a head of environmental quality in a state, you have a bit more freedom than you do as an agency administrator in the federal government, where you really are driven by what the White House wants to see done.
All true. All true.
All true. All right, let's get to a couple of listener questions here. And again, if you have a question for us, drop it there in the comments there on Facebook. Greg, I'm sorry, we probably aren't going to give you a good answer on this one, but Jim, I'm going to ask you anyways. How is outlook on cattle prices in 2021 with feed input cost up? You want to take that one on at all?
Challenging. If I had I used to, when I give my speeches, I have Pro Farmers Outlook. Email us, and I specifically will give you Pro Farmers Outlook ranges, or resistance and ranges of where we see both cattle and hog prices going. I just don't have them in front of me at this particular time. But the meat prices in general are going to be a creature of, if you will, of the COVID aid, vaccine distribution, because we're going to see a pickup eventually, and not only the U.S. economy, but the world economy, and that should bode well for the rising demand for protein. So we could have some consumptive demand push. I think we're going to have a demand pull markets across the board for the grains and the meats. But it's not all rosy, because it's going to take some time to get through, to get that, those vaccines, plural, distributed and implemented. But I remember at the top end, there was $111 for cattle, but I'll give you specific contract numbers and all that. But email me, John. Make sure that I get his email, and I'll give him the specifics.
Yeah, Greg, drop us an email at signaltonoise@farmjournal.com, and we'll get you a response. And
sure.
Jim, another thing that's going to play a factor in that is just how restaurants come back online, how quickly they can come back online, and how uh, how the meat industry can anticipate where that shift's going to go, because again, it's, we've talked about this previously, but it takes a different set of packaging and processing to send to the retail industry and the grocery stores that it does for the restaurant industry and some of the wholesale industry. And so that's going to take some adjustment from the meatpacking plants to get back and figure out where that balance is going to be post-COVID.
No doubt. And also the school system, because they use so much meat and hamburgers, etc. And of course, the dairy products, the specialty products, all that is critical, is why many of the economists that I talked with relative to the ag letter, our look ahead to 2021, are pretty upbeat from late spring through the remainder of 2021, John. They to a person, they were upbeat. Now, there's always flies in the ointment, potential black swans, and we listed those. Any new president is eventually challenged by this skullduggery world we live in, and it could be Iran, it could be North Korea, it could be China, it could be Russia. So you always have those trepidations that you have to balance with because we've just been through the biggest black swan, I think, in our lives relative to relative to COVID-19. But at least we got some fundamentals going on in place. I will tell you a personal story. I'm in the second week, going into the third week of a diet, and I subscribe to Tavala. Now, I don't know whether you've seen that in your televisions, but it's prepared meals. They're not frozen. And some of their steak, although smaller quantities, and pork and fish, they're not only good, they're very good. The seasoning, etc. And that speaks well of the cattle industry. I mean, they're doing something with Tavala that I'm looking forward to eating steak in much smaller quantities, and every meal that I've had from them, mostly, especially in the meat area, has been very good. So this shows the positive side of that cattle industry, that they want to make almost every steak you have taste good. And at least from even when I'm on a diet, the seasoning of their steaks is fantastic.
So, and we received no compensation for that, but to all the folks, if you're listening, hey, we're here. And Jim's obviously a great endorser.
Yeah, well, it works. I mean, I'll tell you, I'd take them on if it didn't work. Plus, you get an oven. You get a broiled oven and a steam oven for $99. I can't believe the deal.
There you go. All right, we'll stay with listener questions here.
Sure.
From Reed, what's Biden's new upcoming Secretary of Ag view on ethanol production? So Tom Vilsack is a known quantity here because of his previous service as USDA Secretary, and he's not been silent in the years since when he's been at U.S. Dairy Export Council. Fair to say he's a pretty strong supporter of ethanol. And Jim, I think people may not realize how much he fought behind the scenes with Gina McCarthy within the Obama administration over ethanol issues.
He did. And two, he went on the record during the presidential campaign to get a difference between, at the time, the Trump administration's waivers of the RFS, and got Biden to commit that he won't be anywhere near as aggressive on waivers as the Trump administration has been and was. So that's on the record. So that's one area, and he definitely is a supporter of renewable fuels. Watch to see how he tries to blend that into the climate change debate, because there are very good positive elements of the biofuel industry, not just corn-based ethanol, but biodiesel, renewable biodiesel, etc. So that, and he is an effective spokesman, and Vilsack does his homework, and he is well respected by the incoming President Biden. But his wife and him are much better friends than I ever thought that they were. So his portfolio is going to be more than just USDA secretary. He's going to be an advisor, like a kitchen cabinet, if you will, advisor, from what I've been told by some of the Biden people, John. So that speaks highly not only of Vilsack, but it also, again, he hopefully he'll follow through with his clear, support for the biofuel industry, because it's needed.
Well, an understanding of agriculture in general as the administration takes on these carbon issues, the climate issues. Tom Vilsack has a very good understanding of how those impact agriculture, and I think, as you noted, has the president-elect's ear, and I think will voice concerns about impacts there as they come up.
Yes, it's in the food area that he is very opinionated on, and I don't see him changing. It's really more the Democratic approach to food safety, food regulations, etc. But I'll try to be very brief here. This is heartfelt when it comes to the incoming, returning USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, because he was an orphan left on the steps, literally, of a Catholic church in Pittsburgh, but his adopted parents. He was a overweight child, and they used to put pictures of fat kids on the refrigerator. He tells this story. So food is very important to him, and you're not going to change him relative to prudent eating, the right kinds of fruits and vegetables, etc. So I did want to point that out again. Right. I've already seen people in the dairy industry, of which he's coming from. Will he be too focused on the dairy industry side as opposed to actual dairy producers? I've already seen some carping come in the last few days from some groups, and I think he's going to have to be very careful relative to dairy policy issues, because that's where he's coming from, John. And
right,
and
that's where people
that's
are going to be watching.
Yeah. Absolutely, and he's smart. He'll watch it.
All right, another question coming in from Bradley, and this is a great question that I don't know that we have a good answer to, but we're certainly something that we've already noted we're going to be watching in the new year, and that is, when will there be a legitimate carbon exchange? We've seen carbon exchanges coming online, but nothing of a scope yet that looks like it would manage all of agriculture or a significant portion of agriculture.
A very good question, but the intent is to, in the ag, carbon credit area, and this is part of the Biden, game plan, is to have USDA for agriculture be the purveyor of this, almost like a reverse auction, if you will. And so I would watch for that. But again, I'll go back to you and all other listeners and viewers. From what you've told me, you want to see the details. We want to see the details. How is this going to be run? There'll be initial hearings on Capitol Hill on this way, this thing. So hopefully it'll be thought out. But again, there's more unknowns than knowns on this one. But it looks like the government, and this is the good role of government, to at least set up the platform, but hopefully let private industry, carry out the program, John.
Right. Well, and it's, the same old chicken and egg thing. You've got to have enough people offering up the carbon credits, and you have to have enough people willing to buy up those carbon credits. And government can play a role to provide incentives on both sides of that. Absolutely.
And if it's done right, this could be another revenue stream, for the business of agriculture, if they can garner it with best practices, legacy things, all those things I said before. But we're just in the infancy of seeing this thing going. But this is not a new development. Obama tried to do some of these things, but they've got a lot of fits and starts. Now they'll build on that, John, and they made some major mistakes in the Obama administration on this topic. So we're going to see if they learned anything.
Yeah, and it's not like nothing's happening. I mean, most of the major seed companies in the last year have come out with some sort of carbon program. Now, again, those are all ad hoc one-offs. There are a couple companies that are trying to be a carbon credit clearinghouse, but again, none of those are of significant size yet.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to see if USDA can fill that void.
And I think Clinton said on AgriTalk today that the next issue of Farm Journal, will have a big article on some of these, private industry initiatives. I think that's what he said, John.
Yeah, that and this past or yesterday, Thursday's AgriTalk AM. I'd encourage folks who are interested in carbon to go back and listen to that. Tyne Morgan was guest hosting for Chip and had some great coverage about how how this carbon industry is really going to be a data industry, and the money is going to come from data. And talking to some folks in the industry about how they're addressing it, and it was very interesting. I'd encourage you to listen to that show. Moving on to a comment here from Pat saying, working on year-end taxes, a lot of the PPP, CFAP, and MFP payments will be sent back to the government by April 15th. Probably true, but, imagine how much worse it'd be if you didn't have those payments to be sending.
Yes. Oh,
to
yes.
the government.
Yeah, that's a problem you want to have if you have to pay taxes. I'll take it. I'll take it if you don't want it. There will be some of that, and some of the changes in the PPP that will be more, business and farmer friendly could show up in one of these two COVID aid packages or the omnibus bill from what we're hearing, John. So I don't think we've seen the end relative to the operation of the PPP program and, other programs, John. But as far as taxes you brought up, a lot depends on taxes for 2021 in the future on the critical to Georgia Senate races, and maybe we should go to that now, John, because other than COVID-19 vaccine, to me, which is the biggest issue for 2021, because it's going to drive not only our wherewithal, hopefully finally getting out, but it's going to drive almost all markets, consumption, etc., financial markets, agriculture markets, etc. But in the operation of the Biden program, there's going to be a big difference to whether or not the Democrats control the Senate, because that'll be a governor, if you will, on some of the aggressive side of the Biden and the Democrats' initiatives.
Well, even if they would win both seats, they still can't get too aggressive because the margin is so tight in both the House and the Senate. But it certainly does open a little bit more of a door for them if they were to win both those Senate seats.
Oh, I think so. I think they would get aggressive. But, when I did some research after AgriTalk, the prognosticators who were so awful, most of them, not all of them, wrong in 2020 elections are saying, this thing, the outcomes are looking increasingly too close to call. Now, historically, Republicans have dominated runoff elections in Georgia because they tend to be low turnouts. Now, in this past election in November, almost 70% of the Georgia voters voted. And that's about 5 million votes were cast in the fall. And it turned the state blue for the president for the first time in 28 years. Now, the demographics are going to play the key in this, two Senate contest, because the Democrats need a very strong showing from African-American voters, and the Republicans are going to try to bank again on Trump to deliver the rural and ex-urban whites on Election Day. But right now we have a little battle, intra-party battle in the Republican Party, because of several of them, including Trump, has been knocking some, not only the election, results in Georgia for president, but a number of the Republican officials in the state. Will that negativity lead enough Republicans in Georgia not to vote? That's a question mark. I don't care who you talk to; they don't know. But polling suggests that. Purdue against Ossoff and Loeffler against Warnock are toss-ups right now. So I will tell you, more than 914,000 people have already voted in Georgia. including 24,000 who did not vote in the general election.
Really?
Yes, just got
Wow.
that in minutes ago. And I thought, boy, this is going to be something to watch. Turnout has not topped 3/5 of the general election number in any of the previous four Georgia runoffs since 1992. So if you go on that, it would suggest about 3 million ballots are cast overall. So there's your line marker. If it's much more than 3 million, we could see a volatile race under both races, because that would tell you that they're nationalizing this race, which I really think they are, John, the amount of
Well, yeah,
money
they
that's
did.
going in.
Yeah, they definitely are. And I think you are going to see higher than usual turnout for this runoff race. But I think it'd be nearly impossible to see the kind of turnout that we saw in the general election. So that puts it somewhere at 3.5 to 4 maybe
Yeah.
million turnout.
And you would think that the Republicans would have learned some lessons, that the early voters in the presidential election heavily skewed toward the Democrats as opposed to Republicans. So we're going to see if they've learned some lessons. I think that was one of Trump's strategic faults, that he poo-pooed the early voters, not only mail-in, but early voters, because he relied everything on election day, and that was a failed strategy, as it turned out.
Is it? I assume it's pretty highly likely that both these seats will go to the same party.
I don't like to say highly likely. I say highly likely that the Republicans would win at least one of the two. And if that's the case, then the Republicans would control the Senate, because the Democrats need to win both. Highly unlikely, but still possible, because it would be 50-50 in the Senate, and the Democrats would break the tie, because Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, would break tie vote. Right. So,
but you've got the same electorate voting for these two positions statewide at the same time. It would seem to be difficult to split that.
Well, yeah, but I've learned in elections, it's just the unexpected is happening too much. Again, notes: Biden claimed the states had 16 electoral votes by a margin of around 12,000 out of those 5 million votes that were cast in the fall, John. And Ossoff that's the Democratic candidate against Perdue. He came within 88,000 votes, just 2 percentage points of upsetting Perdue. Now, the other contest is complex, because they had different rules for the special election, and that drew 19 candidates. The top Republicans were Loeffler and Collins, and they got a combined 46% of the vote, and Warnock and his two main Democrat opponents took 45%. So you can see those percentages pretty close, isn't it? Within the margin of error. I guess that can either be both or 1 and 1. It would be hard to me, based just on history, for the Democrats to win both. But I think this past election has shown that these mail-in votes are a game changer, and we're going to see if Georgia, does it again relative to the Democratic, Party.
All right. Let's get in one last question here from Dustin. Is Dairy Aid set on donation program money or possible food box yet? That's still a question mark, but folks in Washington have liked the food boxes.
Yes, and I know the Democrats have complained about it and how it was implemented. They probably will continue it, change the name, some of the requirements, etc. I will tell you that Debbie Stabenow, right now, the ranking member on the Senate Ag Committee, is pushing for a dairy donation program in the COVID aid package. So that's interesting. I know Colin Peterson is as well. Whether or not that is in the final language remains to be seen. But I know it's a market factor in the dairy market, because if that were to be announced as in that bill, that will be supportive to a number of dairy products, both in the cash and the futures markets, John.
Yeah, and as we see Democrat influence increase in the new administration, you're going to see that flip more towards food box type programs rather than direct payments.
Absolutely. You know, it's the kind of the domestic version of food for peace, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And food banks. The Democrats are already saying in this COVID package, I think there's some money to help a continued aid to the food banks. I consistently say I hope that the food bank system works on the infrastructure that they have and getting more cooling units out there, you know, for the future. Because I don't think this is a one-off thing. I'm not forecasting another COVID-19 situation, God forbid, but I do think that we need a better system on the food banks so they can store more food relative to, you know, food emergencies, for weather-related things that I'll almost guarantee you. So, you know, crisis in the next decade from tornadoes, floods, fires, etc. So we're going to need that infrastructure anyway. You know, let's get through it.
All right. And quickly, since we're going long anyways, let's we haven't talked yet about the House Ag Committee. We know how that's going to shape up now. We've got Doug Scott as the new chairman.
Yes,
Or David Scott, excuse me.
yes, and you know, from Georgia, and he put out a statement by saying he's going to bring up a number of Black American issues relative to holding USDA's feet to the fire under responsibly implementing not only farm programs but overall policy. You know, when it comes to Black Americans, so he hit that front and center, John.
All right. And then the minority leader or the ranking member on the Ag Committee is going to be. I was hoping you were going to remember because the name escaped me. Yeah.
On the Republican side. Oh, J.T. Thompson.
Yeah.
J.T. Thompson.
Thompson,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. J.T. Thompson. Yeah, we've had him on more than a few times on AgriTalk. A gregarious guy, knows his stuff, knows the dairy market, of course, and the sugar market because of Hershey in Pennsylvania, but yet he knows the sensitivity of U.S. sugar. So I
Well, Jim, we just lost your audio. You are gone. So, well, I guess with that, we will wrap it up and we will catch up with Jim again in a couple of weeks. We're going to be gone on holiday break for the next couple of weeks. And unless something comes up, we may throw in a special in there somewhere. That wraps up this week's edition of DC Signal to Noise.